Good day. This webinar is designed to provide an overview of the Multi-State Fleet Response Working Group and its accomplishments during calendar year 2013, which was really its first year of operation. On the phone with us today is John Shaner. John is the chair of the Multi-State Fleet Working Group and has been around the electrical industry for a long time. John and I met in 2011. And since that time, he and I and others have been working together in the electric sector, along with states and several other sectors in finance, retail, food, oil, to work some of the issues in this fleet working group. So with that, John, I just wanted to introduce you and provide you an opportunity to make some opening comments.
Yes, thanks, Tom. I've been involved with All Hazards Consortium since 2011 when DHS introduced us. And representing the private sector, this is an opportunity that over the last couple of years we have worked through the All Hazards Consortium to develop better partnerships with the state, federal, and other private sectors. So this has been a great opportunity over the last few years, and looking forward to continuing to work with All Hazards Consortium.
Good, thank you, John. So this webinar is going to be a short presentation. We'll talk first about what is the consortium, and then what is the working group, and what does the working group do, and so forth. So let me first cover a history of the All Hazards Consortium. The consortium was founded in 2005 by a group of states, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. It quickly then spread to the border states of North Carolina, West Virginia, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. And then New Jersey and New York started to participate. They kind of capped the governance at those 9 states, if you will, but any state can participate in the consortium. Today, it represents about 15,000 stakeholders. It promotes multi-state issues for planning, education, exercises, really tabletop exercises, operational requirements, solution development. So it's really focused on helping states work together to restore critical infrastructure, whether it's power, or food, water, transportation, telecom, and so forth. And its value proposition to the business community is it helps business get back to business faster by coordinating with states at the operational level. So in the end, the benefit of this is this expedites community and economic resilience. Bouncing back from events is a critical factor for a number of different reasons. So in the end, the mission of the consortium is really to help improve the region's ability to respond and expediting this whole resilience aspect. So what does the HC do? What the HC does in the middle here is it runs an integrated planning framework. This is through a governance structure within the consortium where they establish work groups, and that framework acts as a neutral broker to bring the various parties together, whether it's federal, private sector, or state and local government, into discussions where the consortium will facilitate that and let the operations people dictate what are we going to work on within this working group. The Fleet Working Group is a great example of this. So what we try to look at is how do we bring the upper right corner of the private sector, lifeline sector companies together with the bottom left corner of state and local government, and how do we identify issues that can be mutually beneficial to both. And then from there, how do we tap into the lower right corner, upper left corner within the federal government and private sector associations and nonprofits, solution providers? How do we tap into them when needed to bring about a solution to some of these, whether it's technology or policy or what have you? So what the consortium does is run this framework that allows these parties to come together, sometimes with competing interests, sometimes with different agendas, but they can come into this area, take off their hats, and work together as a region, and then they can go back to their respective corners, if you will, and do what they do day to day. So that's what the consortium does: is this regional integrated planning framework. From the history of the consortium, this gives you an idea of how over time the activities and the focus of the consortium started. In the beginning, 2005 through really 2010, above the line, you'll see it was multi-state focused, vendor supported, and they ran regional workshops and generated reports. And so it was really a collaborative effort focused on homeland security and emergency management issues. Okay. During its second phase, really from 2011 through 2013, it began to be private sector focused on specific sectors. So the electric sector was a sector to focus on. The ports and transportation sector, the rail sector, the food sector. They started looking at sector focused, government supported. So this was a big shift in the consortiums, where it was resourced from, the state and local governments. The federal partners provided help to that, not in the form of funding, but in people and technical assistance. And if you will, this took on a different flavor because now we were mixing in the owner operators of the private sector in with the planning framework that the states were designing. And John, I think this was really in 2011 was when you and I first met, which is a great example. DHS brought us together and provided some consultants to help us work the issue. Maybe you can address that for just a second here of how this got started in our second phase of the consortium.
Yeah, in late 2011, DHS, in fact, up to that point, the whole hazard consortium wasn't even in my line of sight. And in 2011, DHS brought us together in Philadelphia, sponsored by PICO, and we had a meeting to talk about issues that have occurred or choke points that have occurred since Katrina in moving a fleet movement. Well, it wasn't just specific to electric. There was banking, there was petroleum, there was telecom in the audience. We focused on the movement of fleet, and we got to interact with the All Hazard Consortium on facilitating the meeting, understanding what these issues were. As we progressed into 2012, we were invited to one of the All Hazard Consortium Board of Directors meeting where we actually had an opportunity behind closed doors to have a very open, honest discussion with the public sector on issues. And what we found out from an operational perspective that our issues from the private sector were no different than from the public sector. And that we had one intention was to get the communities back to normalcy as soon as possible. When we started understanding each other, creating these partnerships, we were able to better develop and work towards supporting these issues that we deal with, such as waste stations, EV paths, trip and fuel permits, just to name a few. And then it has progressed in 2013. We actually started implementing, such as the coordination conference call, electronic communication between public and private, with the intentions of moving resources as safely and quickly as possible to get our communities back to normal.
So in 2013 was really the creation of the Multi-State Fleet Working Group, which was the first working group the states had created that was independently operated by the private sector, so that it could sustain turnover in government, shifting priorities and agendas and grants and so forth. So this was a different kind of model, and it proved quite successful. You'll hear about in some upcoming slides about some of the accomplishments it's done. So going forward from 2014 to 2017, the plan is that this organization will become a multi-sector focus. So they're going to add fuel and food and rail and cybersecurity, other sectors or topics, if you will, jointly public and private supported. And it's really going to focus on producing sector drills for exercises and training, operational solutions that which you'll hear about a couple in just a minute, and really sharing of data. Private sector operational data being shared with states is very powerful and can help states help the private sector get power back on quicker, restore critical infrastructure faster, and so forth. So as the organization has evolved, it's continued to stay focused on its original mission, which is to prepare the region better to respond to disasters of any kind. But it's really taken a focus, if you will, on restoration of critical infrastructure and community and economic resilience. So those are nice buzzwords to really getting business back to business faster, and that's really the core of the activities of these private sector run working groups. So how does the AHC function? Very simply, it runs working groups. And these working groups are really where the work gets done in the All Hazards Consortium. So you can see by this design here, there's private sector groups and there's public sector groups. We learned early you can't always mix these two because there are things government has to work on with just government in the room. There's things the private sector has to work on with just private sector in the room. So what we've been able to do is create a construct where these two types of work groups can work independently, but they can come together in the middle, if you will, to work on joint exercises, training and education, identifying sector issues and resolving them, creating solutions, and so forth. So what you have here is how we've divided this into a regional working group structure. So what is the AHC doing and how does it operate during an event? Well, the first thing, the AHC is very cautious and careful not to compete or confuse with existing state processes and agencies. There's a lot of people trying to help during disasters, but many times in the spirit of helping, they can actually get in the way. And we paid very close attention to this during Sandy as well as other storms. And we've also violated this in an attempt to help. Years ago, we got in the middle of something to expedite some water, and it really messed up emergency management process. And we didn't do it on purpose. We just learned in the process, hey, wait a minute, there's a process in place, and we didn't know what it is, so we can help. So what we try to do is become an extension, if you will, of government and become an interface with the private sector operators, if you will, so that we can do three things across the bottom. One, business to business and business to government information exchange. This occurred during Sandy quite successfully, and we, the consortium, just served as a broker, if you will, to establish those connections. The second one is really to connect public-private operations people. And I'm going to ask John for you to comment about Sandy and the toll booths in just a second, because I thought that was a great example of what this bubble means. And the third one is we kind of have informally established a help desk, if you will, to resolve regional issues, which we'll speak to in length here for the complete movement coordination. So, John, can you talk for a second about how we resolved the toll station issues during Sandy? I thought that was a good example of how we connected the operations people.
Yeah, and actually, I kind of like to take this back to the ratio also. But during Sandy, you know, we had these discussions. We've had the interactions with the private sector through the All Hazards Consortium, tying in the public sector about these issues, these choke points that in moving fleets, what we deal with, and one of them is the easy path. And during that, Tom and I got together on a phone call and said, hey, what can we do that allow the fleet to get through the way stations, the easy path, as quickly as possible, but we're willing to pay our dues. So what Tom did, or what All Hazards Consortium did, is they tied us in with actually people in the states that run those toll booths. And for example, in New Jersey, we were able to come up with a very short 5-step policy or practice or procedure for the trucks to enter a specific toll gate, notify the toll authority that they were coming through, and be able to expedite those resources through that toll gate as quickly and safely as possible. That was an excellent example of something that wasn't down on paper, but during that event, we actually created the process and initiated it within minutes by having a call between operational people, both on the public and private sector. During the ratio, we had worked on with U.S. Customs, border crossings with the Canadian Customs. We had a process in place, wasn't approved, and during the ratio event, U.S. Customs called the private sector and said, hey, are you moving resources back and forth? Let's implement this procedure knowing that agent at the toll, at the border crossing has the final say. And we were able to reduce movement of resources across the Canadian border from anywhere of delays up to 2 hours down to 20 seconds. So there's two excellent examples during 2013 and 2012 of our process working on it and just implementing it at the time when we need it.
So, and it was during that process that The states asked John to serve as a board of director member for the All Hazards Consortium. He accepted. We were glad to hear that. So as we continue to integrate these people and processes, it tends to have very positive impacts at the operational level. So we're going to turn the attention now to what is the Multi-State Fleet Response Working Group. So as I said earlier, this is a private sector operated work group formed underneath the All Hazards Consortium as a 501c3. The reason it was set up that way is the private sector wanted to run it and operate it and not have it be turned off because of things that go on outside of their control. But they wanted the states to be intimately involved for a number of reasons. So forming this working group underneath the consortium brought those two requirements to bear. So what they decided to do with this group is to focus on expediting power restoration by focusing on fleet movement issues that cross state lines. And we'll show you what a number of choke points that fleet movement has involved in it. And I was, as John taught me about that, I was stunned to learn all this stuff. So the states serve as advisors to this group because when you're dealing with regulated utilities, you have to be very careful when you involve public sector. And so checking with legal and all that, we had to go look through that. The state's role was perfect to serve as advisors to the working group. What the working group does is identify the sector issues that are priorities and work with the states to prioritize those. So sometimes the private sector wants to work on an issue that doesn't involve the states. Next issue might involve the states, and the states can tell them, well, we wouldn't approach it this way, we'd do it that way, it'd be better it'd be faster, and then we adapt the process to that. So having the states as advisors really helps the electric sector identify these issues. And then the last one here is it provides support to state operations, as we will talk about later during the ice storms and in 2013 and early 14. This became an extension to help expedite power restoration, which we'll talk about in just a second. So that's really what the Fleet Working Group does. This slide talks to the history of the work group. So really starting in 2011, it'll show you the highlight meetings there above, and then down below, what were the results produced. And I wasn't planning, John, to walk through all of these, but I thought if we zeroed in on one or two, I thought would be very helpful. So one of the big ones that came out of 2013 was this fleet movement coordination process in December of 2013. And John, maybe you can talk to that for a minute, how that was kind of thought up during the CADEX exercise series and how we tested it and ultimately turned it on as a process.
Yeah, I'd like to go back real quick. Don't change the slide, but while we're focusing on the electric sector, it's important to recognize that our focus is on the choke points, and that those choke points or those issues that we have in moving commercial motor vehicles also impact telecom, cable, food, petroleum. So it's not limited. While electric sector, we recognize that in many cases it takes electric for a lot of other private sectors to engage, but we're not just focused on the electric sector. During 2013, one of the things during the CADEX exercise, we exercised the thought process of how would operational people from the private and public sector be able to get together when they recognize a potential threat or were engaged into a threat that was unannounced, such as the ratio event back in 2012 that just occurred over a very short period of time. How do we engage the operational people? And then how do we talk about those issues that we need solutions to or resolutions to move fleets up and down the road as effectively as possible and safely? We don't want to break any laws, and we want to be able to move the fleet the following rules that both the public and private sector have in place. We initiated during the CADEX exercise a coordination call, a fleet movement coordination call between private and public. It was focused on operational. This call was not, as existing jurisdictional call, but this call looked at the movement from a region, multi-state. So we look at it from the northeast, we look at it from a west to east movement of resources. The state that would be either releasing resources to move to another state or drive through states that aren't impacted, but resources have to drive through to get to a location that was impacted. During the prior to the CADX exercise, we recognized that the state needs information that benefits the movement of these resources. Just knowing what resources are coming from where and going to has a great impact on the state's better understanding of that this event is a threat. It may not be a threat to us specifically. During that call, we had developed an agenda, very quick call. We try to keep it 30 minutes. Then what happened is in December, we actually implemented that call. We had some difficulties, more technology, not necessarily the call. The agenda was driven out. It was driven out according to what we had proposed. We transferred information between private and public sector that enhanced what was already being discussed at more of a state level or jurisdictional level. And we didn't have any impacts on what was happening within the states that were being threatened. We actually enhanced that. We helped in the movement through way stations, through Easy Pass, that understanding during that. And then we have progressed further is that's become more of electronic type communications versus having to have a conference call. So it happens quicker, and what we're doing now, we're actually tying the specific state with the specific entity that's moving the resources. That way they're dealing directly with each other from an operational perspective.
So the process evolves that can make it quicker, faster, better, basically. So as we go into 2014, a big part of the agenda for 2014 is to educate people on what the working group is and what it does and what its processes are, and then continue to work other issues as well. So it's funny. It's only been a couple of years, but it seems there's been a lot happening. This slide just touches the tip of the iceberg as far as the activities. So what does the Fleet Working Group do? Again, it's an enabling framework that brings state and local and electric sector companies and other sector companies into a process, and it really is focused on spitting out four results. One is planning. The joint planning meetings, mostly virtual, conference calls and so forth, are what set the agenda and identify the problems and the solutions. The next piece is education and training. We find that education is one of the biggest issues that's impediments to this. Half of the things the private sector needed, the states had already developed, but it was fractured all over these various websites around the country. And sometimes it's just educating the private sector as to what's already available for requirements the states have already done, and they host it on their DOT websites or other different websites. And vice versa. I think a lot of people in the public sector didn't really understand or don't really understand the mutual aid process and how companies work together to share people and trucks to respond to storms well in advance of the storm. These things are moving and investments are being made on the predicted events. So this is a huge investment the private sector does, and it's a big process, and the states didn't always understand it. So education and training is really, really important. Tabletop drills and exercises is a third product, and that's really the CADX exercise, stands for catastrophic exercise. It came out of the FEMA catastrophic exercise grant program called the RCPGP. And this is really building on the success of that grant to focus on specific tabletop exercises for the sector. And then we'll add another sector and another sector. And what we're trying to do there is create modules that these exercises, each module will be developed to address a specific operational need in that sector. So downstream, we look to have a playbook of these modules for the electric sector that any exercise could use, whether it's DOD or federal agencies or states or private sector. And then the last one here is how we produce operational solutions, which we'll show you here in the presentation. Whether that's data or training or an Easy Pass guidebook or a website or a data portal or a PIVI identity management card to share sensitive information. These solutions are developed to address specific operational problems. So the joint development of all of this is what makes this really sing. And I think having the states involved, John, has really been a wonderful addition to the private sector because there's not a lot of places where operators in the electric sector can work closely with operators in the state government. And I think that's been a big value of this working group and the framework. So, John, any comments on that before I move on?
No, I totally agree. Being able to communicate with, understand, and learn together with both the operational people in the public side and operational people on the private side, and both sides can learn from each other, has been an enormous benefit. In fact, in my whole career, and I'm approaching 40 years in the electric sector, I've never had an opportunity to work so closely with the public sector as I have through the whole hazardous consortium.
Okay, thank you, John. So I won't go into all of this, but we were asked, who benefits? What's the benefit here? So this slide lists out some of the private sector benefits and some of the government benefits, and I think probably it's hard to zero in on one. There's certainly ways to reduce cost and expedite power restoration. There's a lot of benefits like that. I think one of the most interesting one, and John, I'd love to hear your perspective. One of the ones that I've noticed the most is the education. Once people understand what the private sector is dealing with and how and what government's dealing with on this, they kind of gain a common understanding and perspective on the matter. And it really breeds a culture of, okay, now how do we, knowing both sides of the coin, how do we develop something that will serve us both and achieve the common goal? And I see that happen quite often as a result of this. John, I'll let you comment here to some of the benefits that from your perspective that are relevant.
Yeah, one of the things that we hear a lot, both from the public and private sector, is building of partnerships. And, saying it is one thing, but doing it is another. And what has happened since 2011 through the whole hazardous consortium is we have built partnerships, not just with the local states, but also with federal agencies. We have all levels. We have from the private sector. It's not just the electric sector, but it's telecom, it's banking, it's financial, it's food, petroleum. We're engaging many sectors into this partnership because we are discussing real problems and we're coming up with real solutions. And what it also is bringing sustainability, because what we're talking to is we're not talking to the groups that change. We're talking with groups that have the ability to sustain that from the private sector and the public sector to keep this going. And it has really improved what we're doing. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits when you talk about cost and you talk about information exchange, but we are doing the partnership thing. There's just no doubt. What I've gained from my perspective through the partnerships over the last couple of years cannot be put in words.
Great, thank you, John. Let's go to our next slide. This to me was one of the most interesting parts of the whole process, was identifying choke points and then short-term solutions. So many times what happens during exercises and things is there's a lot of meetings that go on and there's a lot of paper that's generated. And one of the things that was frustrating so many of the states and the private sector was, okay, now what? Now we've done an exercise. It's got an after-action report. It's got, remedies. Who owns them and who's going to fix them? And so many times those things don't get fixed because there's not enough money, or the priorities shift, or the money runs out. So when they started the Fleet Working Group, John and Chris Geldart in D.C. and Joe Picciano in Jersey, and I'll name a bunch of states, wanted to do something different. So what they started to do was to outline the choke points. And their exercises changed from producing product to developing solutions and testing those solutions as part of the exercise. It's a very different model. And so as a process, the government became aware of a lot of choke points they didn't even know were choke points. I think on the other side too, John, the government, the private sector became aware of some of the issues facing government. Okay, for example, the liaison officers that were staffing the emergency operations centers. There was a lot of confusion on that person's role and responsibility and authority to redirect fleets and operations, and I think part of that was the government had issues that the private sector wasn't fully aware or understood because this is an operational issues, and most of the time the operators aren't working together. So, what this slide talks to is really many of the choke points that the working group has identified and started working on. And I believe, John, the next slide here is outlines kind of how the work group is taking these on. So the first one, upper left corner, is interstate movement. So what commercial motor vehicle regulations does each state follow? So they're addressing that through education. They've developed a website that centralizes all those websites in one place. And learning how the federal DOT regulations are put out, how the states adopt them, and so forth. That's just one example. John, this was you had a huge role in this, and I wanted to have you share your perspectives on this slide as well.
Yeah, and the example you just gave, the electric liaison officer, that we had a team, public-private team, work on, and during the CADEX exercise in 2013, that's not even on here. This is specific to movement of fleet in those choke points. What has come out of here is a lot of good information. By no means are these all resolved, but what we're working on is what can we do today to get fleets up and down the road. What is a mid-term solution? We'll talk more about this later. And what's the long-term solution that no matter whether it's a small event or a very big event, that we're doing the same process. Just such as 511 road information, knowing how quick that's updated from a private sector to how quick the public sector updates that and how the information is seen is very important to us. What we've seen in declarations is a change from what this fleet working group has done. Instead of a state us asking for a declaration, just asking for a declaration that we hope encompasses everything, we are asking for specific declarations such as fuel and trip and weight permit declaration to get fleets up and down the road. I could spend all day on this one slide just talking about what we're doing. The U.S.-Canadian border crossing. To me, it's a process. We have tested it. We have done it. We have seen the effectiveness of it. The authorities still align that the border crossing with the agent. We have interaction with both the U.S. and the Canadian border crossing and FEMA on this process, where the big thing now is educating the private sector that this process exists and what we need to do to make the process work. So, again, Tom, I could go on this slide, but this one excites me because I see a lot of changes we've done over the last couple of years just off this one slide.
Indeed. We get asked who's involved. So this slide gives you an idea of, this is a national working group. It does its planning regionally, but its products are shared nationally. So what we have here is a slide, and these are all the organizations that have participated in the working group meetings, in the process development, in the solution development, in the alerting. As you can see, it's touched a lot of people, some more than others, but virtually every one of these organizations has touched the fleet working group in some way from an operational perspective. So whether it's responding to an ice storm or it's part of the solution development or test, So we just wanted to recognize and thank all these various organizations that have been a part of this nationally. So, um, so what are our 2014 objectives? As you can see, training and education is number one. We've done a lot, produced a lot. Now we want to look at, all right, how do we educate people to what's available? Information sharing and technology is another big one. It's now how do we automate some of this? How do we fund it? Who are the partners, federal, state, local, private sector that are interested in that? We want to continue to conduct joint exercises that will really focus on tabletop exercises and drills that develop these electric sector modules for exercises, and a food sector module or a rail sector module. Um, this is a big initiative going on right now for 2014. Partnerships. We want to continue to identify the operating partners that can help us with some of these issues. We had two very important ones that came out of 2013. One was the I-95 Corridor Coalition, which has done a lot of work up and down the East Coast for transportation-related information sharing with states, and that those relationships continue to develop. We also had another one with a group called TSCP, the Trans Global Secure Collaboration Program, basically a nonprofit established by the Defense Industrial Base that uses identity management solutions to share information that's sensitive all over the world. So there's about 40 to 50 million people using this PIV-I standard process. PIV-I is a personal identity verification interoperable with the federal government standard. And it's something that's very simple. They use it for email. They lock down emails and shift stuff around. Many other things they do with it, but this work group's looking at that type of thing through that partnership. And there will be others as we go forward. I think the other one is really sustainment. How do we develop a plan to sustain the working group as we go forward, as government folks turn over? How do we sustain this financially, leadership-wise, and its focus? I think we got a good plan in place for that. And I think we're going to continue to refine and define our short, medium, and long-term goals. These things are morphing many times as people learn more and more about what limitations government has or private sector has. These goals are adjusted to reality, and so we're looking at how do we continue to develop these choke points in various other sectors and develop them. So this is our slide for kind of our direction forward, and all this is outlined in our annual report, which I'll jump to on this slide. We just produced this. It was released in early April. It is on our website at fleetresponse.org, and it outlines three basic areas: the partnerships, products, and processes that we developed. John, myself, a number of other authors were involved in this report. It's about 22 pages, and it is full of solutions that identified operational issues in the electric sector. And we tried to articulate this on this slide. So I think the big one I wanted to talk to is probably the most important process that came out of 2013 was this whole fleet movement coordination initiative. Everyone wants to get the power back on. Well, to do that requires multiple waves of fleets that come from around the country that pass through states where the sun is shining, as you can see on this graphic, and move into states where it's a dark sky, gray sky day. So this is a major coordination effort, and through John and other leaders in the private sector, they developed a process that expedited this. So John, I'm going to let you speak to what this is, but this is part of the process. And so, John, I want you to describe what this is and how this was provided to the states and how it was helpful.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that when an event occurs or is predicted to occur, we all understand it's not a jurisdictional weather event. It is regional. It crosses state lines. In addition, when the event is impacted, there could be other impacts going on across the state, such as hot weather emergencies, thunderstorm activities, snowstorm activities, icing, that delays movement of resources depending on where the needs are. And what this slide is actually indicating at departure. When do we think they're going to arrive? And if you look clear to the right of this slide, it has the requesting company. So if you look at the first line, we're basically saying from New York, we're sending 50 personnel. They're going to go through, there's no border crossing involved here, so that's not an issue. They're going to go through Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and Arkansas to get to Arkansas. And we tried to do this. Now, this is a lot of information. This information is a moving target. It changes all the time. But the idea is to communicate to these different states that resources are coming through their state and for what reason. And so that they're aware of it. At the same time, we're going to give them additional information such as, hey, there's these other events going. So this is the first wave. There may be 2, 3, 4 more waves, and these numbers will change accordingly.
So what the working group did was produce this data. We sent it to all the states involved. We conducted some conference calls. That process is now an email process. And this information gave the states data they hadn't really seen before, and they could provide direction to the private sector on which direction to take, what roads to take. Here's a copy of our declaration, or here we're intending to declare, but there's no declaration yet. It was really a wonderful, very fast example of sharing data with states in order to have states render decisions and guidance to support the fleet movement. This also educated a lot of states to the whole concept of being a pass-through state. If you look on the screen now, you'll see that here, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Kentucky are pass-through states, okay? But in Kentucky, that's part pass-through and part impacted, which is really a different concept. A lot of these folks didn't really understand it. So building awareness that, hey, the sun may be shining in your state, but you know you're going to have a bunch of trucks hitting your border tomorrow morning. Is there any way you can help them move through the state quickly? Not freely, not necessarily getting a pass or waivers like that. That's not what the private sector was looking for. What they were trying to do is do it safely, economically, and just alert the states to help push the process along. And I think, John, overall, it was quite successful. From what we heard back, it seemed to work well and is improving as we go.
Yes, and you know, from this December 6th event, you kind of have to go back to 2013 and look at it. We came up with this idea. We exercised it during CADEC. During December 6th, it just happens, Tom and I got on the phone and said, hey, should we have a call? Should we exercise this call and see how it works? It just happens it was a good idea. We looked into it, and we initiated with 18 states through contacts that the whole hazard consortium had to be able to get them on the phone. We had 3 calls. From then, we have changed the process to be more electronic versus a conference call. Doesn't exclude the conference call, but we're all impacted by many calls. So what we wanted to do is have a lesser impact on individuals, but yet get the information back and forth to each other between the private and public sectors as effectively as possible. In addition, we have what we call Regional Mutual Assistance Group, which I know the All Hazards Consortium has had previous webinars on. And these are groups that have been in place for many, many years that participate in initiating and responding to requests from in the electric sector, getting them involved in initiating this type of transaction or transfer of information. So a lot of things have changed since December 6, 2013.
Very good. So this slide just shows you the operational impact from the recent February 2014 process, which was all email-based. The Regional Mutual Assistance Group, the Southeast Electric Exchange, or called SEE, initiated a request to the Fleet Working Group that, hey, we're planning a fleet movement that will need coordination with multiple states. So the fleet working group sent an email out to 16 states, probably 3 to 5 people per state, in an email outreach, right? Requesting copies of content of declarations and guidance getting through way stations. Um, the several emails were shared back and forth, and the net result was we received copies of declarations, way station guidance. We got information back from the states. Probably the most significant story was around the second or third wave of this. Scott Smith from the SCE sent an email to us saying, "Hey, we've got 400 people, approximately a couple hundred trucks moving from Ohio to North Carolina. Can you help?" And very quickly, we sent emails out to people to locate folks in Ohio, and that took about an hour. And then Ohio started dialoguing directly with SEE on guidance to help. Well, at the same time, we copied West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina on those emails. And through email, this fleet was guided from Ohio through West Virginia, through Virginia to North Carolina. And I think it worked quite well. The feedback that we heard back from Scott was it was really a very smooth process. So this is continuing to evolve and continuing to sustain, looking for that process there. We're looking to document this process as well so we can get this information out. And the states would like the private sector folks to continue to evolve and sustain this with them over in the future. So there were definite operational impacts from this fleet movement process, which again was an idea in early 2013. And by the end of 2013 and into 2014, now is an operational process that's really showing results. So I think that's a great testament to this whole integrated planning framework that the states and the private sector folks have developed jointly as we go forward. So what's the strategy going forward? So John, as the chair, I'll let you address this slide. I think this is an important one to let people know where this is going.
Yes, as part of our strategy going forward, and again, you heard what Plum and I talk about. You have short, mid, and long term. One of the things that the private sector is saying, hey, we have to be safe, we need to be legal, and we need to develop a mutual understanding with our local and state and federal agencies and bring consistency to what we're trying to do. Now, that doesn't mean there's one solution for one problem. It means that we understand that there are different possible solutions for one problem, and they're all workable. Both the public and private sectors have their own perspective on these things. Through the whole hazard consortium, we're addressing these, we're putting them on paper, we're discussing them. As you heard Tom mention, we have taken information that already exists at the different states and put them into one site that you can go and look for Department of Transportation information by states. You can look at it from a federal level. You can look at toll roads, you can look at way stations by state, etc. Non-commercial motor vehicle roadways, that type of information. So we're coordinating these actions. One of the big things that you notice the chart below, we've identified those choke points. They haven't changed. It's commercial motor vehicles, how we license those vehicles, and moving them across state lines. It all has to do around, most of it has to do around that. And then we also recognize that we had the private sector out there trying to solve these things. We had states that had their own ideas on solving them. Then we had federal that was trying to solve these problems, all in a good way. Everybody was doing their best, but what through the whole hazard consortium, as you saw from the list on the previous screen, we were able to bring all these groups together, understand that we have these same problems, and look at what we're all trying to do without duplicating efforts. We're doing that through the multi-fleet response working group, through partnerships, coordinated effort, and education. And then what we expect to get out of this, which we are seeing already results, is short, mid, and long term. big part of this now is educating both the public and the private sectors and having an understanding that this initiative is out there and being done.
Good, thank you, John. I think this is a kind of it's a great slide, and John, I think explaining this is important so people understand how we're identifying and who owns what, who owns which short, mid, and long-term solution. I think this is a really important piece. This is the part that's missing according to the states when they do traditional exercises. They identify issues, but nobody owns the solution, or there's no money for it. And so I think this is an important slide for people to understand how this working group is addressing the strategy to own who owns this, who owns what for these choke points. So, John, I'll let you talk to this one for a minute.
Yeah, and I'm going to take two examples off this chart. If you go halfway down and you see border crossing, and you're going to see the short term says public, the mid term says public, the long term says public. You know, one of the things is the border crossing between Canada and the United States. We want to keep both our countries secure, safe. We don't want people that shouldn't be coming in and out of the different countries going back and forth. So we are reliant upon the U.S. Customs and the Canadian Customs and the Department of Homeland Security to work with us in developing a process to get resources back and forth. We've done that. So that's why you see in the short term it's public, 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 because they have the responsibility of saying whether this will work or not, keeping the country safe and secure while being effective in getting resources across. If we go clear to the top and we see trip, fuel, and weight permits, we see the interstate registration. That's specific to that. If you're registered as an intrastate company, then when you start crossing state lines, you have to deal with trip, fuel, weight permits. Well, right now, the short-term solutions in many cases, which we've seen during previous storms, especially towards the end of 2013, we've seen states issue what they call hit the sticker waivers, meaning you don't need to get trip, fuel, weight permits. Now, these trucks aren't technically overweight within the state. They just become technically overweight when they travel across state lines. And the trip fuel permit is really have to do with the taxes. So as we move forward, the midterm solution to that is how does the private sector start changing their fleets, or how do they redesign how they approve their fleets? And we still need the public sector help in possibly some waivers. And in the long term is we no longer need the waivers, and we have vehicles that have no problem traveling across state lines illegally without having to ask the states for anything. So there's two good examples of how we're approaching these different choke points.
Great, thank you, John. This slide talks about our some examples, not all of them. Some two critical areas are way stations and toll roads and so forth. This is a example of how the approach to short and mid and long-term goals are, and this is very fluid. We've changed these a couple of times, I believe, John, since we started.
Yes.
But this will give people an example of what how are we going after way stations on the short term? Okay, how are we going after toll stations and expediting through there? And so these aren't complete, but certainly it's a start. And I think working with the states, this is a good example of how this looks to evolve over time. So there are many other areas that we're working on, and they're outlined in the report. If you download the report, you can read that. But anyway, we wanted to share with you folks on watching the webinar, how we are going about way station short, mid, and long-term goals and so forth.
Yeah, and Tom, I think a very important part of this is to understand that this brings sustainability to the solutions as we move forward In addition, these solutions would be handled each size of events. So if it's a smaller event that's more confined to like multiple states versus a catastrophic event, that these processes will work in all types of events.
Exactly. Thank you, John. So this concludes our webinar today. On the screen, you'll see the fleet website. If you go there, you can download the report, get information on it. I encourage everybody to sign up for the news and alerts service. It's free, and it's listed. The link is listed right here on this site as well. And John's contact information and my contact information is up there as well. So we hope this webinar was educational for you. It's really a snapshot, if you will, of 2013. But we wanted to produce this and share this on YouTube and on our website and so forth for folks to get to learn more about this working group and this framework and how it's being used by the private sector and the states across the country. So, John, I'll let you provide our closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Tom. And again, as the chair of the working group, over the last few years, it has been incredible. Well, looking at it from the private sector side, our partnerships we've developed with the public sector, we're not just saying it, we're doing it, both from the state and federal level. Coordination, while there are many groups working on the same problems, we're reducing the duplication and putting our efforts toward one direction. So, again, thank you for this opportunity to talk with you and work with you on this important subject.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes the webinar.